Increasing numbers of people are waking up to the need to live more harmoniously with the earth, with one another, and with all life on the planet. We cannot continue as we have been, and other ways of living are possible. I am your host, Epiphany Paris, and I am one of the many holding space for this transformation. In this time, we can reconnect and share our gifts with one another. This show features conversations with rainbow warriors, healers, activists, artists, writers, farmers, and many other people who are living the questions and living the change in their personal lives. This show will focus on practical solutions, radical strategies, paradigm-shifting ideas, inspiring people, and spiritual transformations. This is the space between. In this space between the destructive times we have been living and the holistic way of life that is possible, we are here. What will we do with the time we have? Today we are talking with Charles Eisenstein. Charles Eisenstein is a writer, speaker, and the author of 3 books, Sacred Economics, The Ascent of Humanity, and The Yoga of Eating. We will specifically be focusing on the ideas presented in Sacred Economics. In the introduction of the book, Charles says, "The purpose of this book is to make money and human economy as sacred as everything else in the universe. Obviously, if we are to make money into something sacred, nothing less than a wholesale revolution in money will suffice. A transformation of its essential nature. It is not merely our attitudes about money that must change, as some self-help gurus would have us believe. Rather, we will create new kinds of money that embody and reinforce change attitudes. Sacred Economics describes the new money and the new economy that will coalesce around it. It also explores the metamorphosis in human identity that is both a cause and a result of the transformation of money." What prompted you to write this book, Charles?
Well, it depends how many years you want to go back. The most immediate reason was that The Ascent of Humanity, I talked about the economic crisis, and I wrote a few articles when the financial crisis hit in 2008 that had a really big response, and so I thought, okay, that's the next book I'll write. So that's kind of the more proximate reason.
Okay.
Going back more years, I've always been curious about what is this thing, money, that seems to be leading us on the path to annihilation. Why is it doing that, and could it be any different?
Right. Well, and it seems like you came up with some interesting answers in your book. Would you be willing to talk about the ideas of scarcity versus abundance a little bit?
Sure. One thing that I discovered about the money system is that it creates artificial scarcity where there needn't be scarcity. And we've gotten so used to that we think that scarcity is just basically the nature of the world that we live in, and that therefore we always have to be in competition with each other for never enough, and that life is basically a struggle, and that the most important thing is to make a living. But this is kind of an artificial environment that wasn't the human experience for most of time. Most human beings lived in a state of affluence, a kind of primitive affluence, where they didn't spend that much time subsisting, contrary to kind of this prejudice that we have that life was nasty, brutish, and short. And it really wasn't like that. And it wasn't necessarily like that for a subsistence farmer or a medieval peasant either, especially if there wasn't a war or a plague or something like that. So today, we have an ongoing experience of scarcity, even if we have tremendous material wealth, bigger houses than anyone has had before, more calories, more material things, but we still have an experience, a lived experience of scarcity. But the world is really abundant, and this is kind of challenging for a lot of people. It's triggering because they say, well, what about peak oil? I mean, certainly there's a scarcity of resources out there, a scarcity of food. We have to keep growing more and more to feed the population. But all of these kinds of scarcity are also illusory. We have a scarcity of minerals and oil and energy and stuff simply because we're wasting so much of it and not using it toward any end that serves human well-being. And the same with food. We waste vast amounts of it. There are hundreds of millions of people in the world going hungry every night, but that's not because there's an overall lack of food. And we could grow way, way, way more food if our profit structure were different. Most people don't understand that organic agriculture and permaculture can actually produce way more food than conventional chemical agriculture. So anyway, that's one of the themes of the book, is the fundamental abundance of the world and the artificial scarcity that we've created.
Right, which is a different idea than money being energy, which you hear in a lot of New Age circles.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that money's energy, but it's energy with a certain dynamic built into it.
Right.
Yeah, because it's created as interest-bearing debt. So there's always more debt than there is money. There's never enough money to pay back all of the debts that are owed. So it's kind of like musical chairs. If we were all playing a game of musical chairs, sitting in a circle, and then we get up and the music plays and there's a chair taken out, you can't say, well, if you have an attitude of abundance, then surely you will get a chair, because there's going to be someone left out no matter how abundant their attitude is.
Right, because that's the nature of the system itself.
Right, and that's essentially how we've set it up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of you talk about it quite a bit in the book, interest, how interest works. Because money is created with interest, then there's always more debt than there's money. Right.
And that's something of an oversimplification, but it drives accurate intuitions about the nature of the money system. And it also, the other piece of it is that in order for the system to keep running, more money has to always be created to pay the existing debts. And with that more money, even more debt is created. And with that more money, even more debt, and so on and forever and ever. So it kind of works as long as there's economic growth happening.
Right.
But when we run out of room for growth, then we're in big trouble.
Well, and I like what you talk about in the book about the commodification of the commons, that we take things that didn't used to belong to someone and then somebody claims property rights over it and then sells it back to people that would have had access to it before anyway. Yeah, and this is ongoing. I mean, it happened, several centuries ago with the land commons. But today, like just that recent Apple Samsung case. Yeah. So here's kind of this creative trend that is moving technology toward a certain way of interacting with the user. And this trend is actually larger than just Apple. It's kind of like everyone's tapping into a field of creativity that wants to happen. And whoever gets there first can enclose that set of technologies and claim it for their own and then sell it to everybody else. So it's kind of a privatization of, you could say, the Creative Commons. Because these things would happen anyway. I mean, if it weren't somebody at Apple inventing it, it would be somebody else inventing it. These are in
the kind of cultural matrix.
Right. And it's one thing that you talked about was that it's not a quote from your book right here. It's a conspiracy with no conspirators. Everyone is a puppet, but there's no puppet masters. So it's sort of everybody is part of the system. It's not necessarily good guys and bad guys, but people do what's needed to maintain the system.
Yeah, I'm sure that, I don't know, you or maybe some of the listeners have had that experience when you enter an organization of some sort. You start to think along the lines of other people in that organization. You become a creature of it. And even if you privately disagree with it in the company meetings and everything, you'll find yourself usually saying things that go along with the organizational culture and the way that people are in that organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And our culture is so pervasive because our media is such a big part of our lives. And so that culture of consumption is in so many elements of the fiber of our daily lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to get out of it, It just, a certain way of life comes along naturally with being embedded in this society. It's almost impossible not to consume an awful lot. You have to almost make a crusade about it to not use plastic, for example.
Right. Yeah. It takes a lot of work to detach yourself from that, partly because just that's how the structures are set up.
Yep.
I think I've heard you mention, I think in the book you talked a little bit about the transition movement.
Mm-hmm.
And part of their focus is trying to make it possible for say, eat local food and things like that. The structures that are in place right now kind of require dependence on cars and driving and transportation of goods and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an important level to work at. Some people say, well, it's our consumer choices that drive the whole thing, and we could just change our consumer choices. But it's not so simple. It's not a matter of switching brands. The changes have to go deeper than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'd love to go into some of this more, but before we do that, how about let's take a step back and talk a little bit more about gift cultures, because that's kind of where you start your book at.
Mm-hmm.
How do gift cultures operate differently than the money culture we're currently operating in?
Well, let me just say, just to start out, that to some small extent, we still are also a gift culture. There are many kinds of interactions that we have with people that are not monetized, but it's become much, much less of a gift culture than traditional cultures were. Hunter-gatherer cultures were basically 100% gift cultures. And early agricultural societies were mostly gift cultures. So basically, I think one of the defining features of a gift culture is that you don't get any advantage from accumulating wealth, from accumulating possessions. For hunter-gatherers, that was in part because possessions were a literal burden. You were nomadic, you had to carry them around, so you didn't actually want too many possessions. Another reason is that you would benefit more from giving them than from having them. Because if you gave things, beautiful, precious things, highly desired things to other people, then they would see you as a generous person and they would want to give things to you too. If you were in any kind of need, they would want to take care of that need. And even people who weren't receiving directly from you, they would see that, oh, you are a generous person. And they, just like today, when you see somebody being really generous, you want to take care of them. And that was how society worked. So in those societies, this dichotomy we have today between selfishness and altruism didn't apply. It was to your selfish advantage to be extremely generous. That's very different than today's society, where wealth, security, status, and so forth are mostly a matter of how much you have, how much you possess, possess and how much you accumulate, not how generous you've been. Although even so, like even in, in like high society, you do get status from, supporting the opera and things like that. So there is still some of that left. But generally speaking, when we talk about financial security, we don't talk about how much money we've given away. We talk about how much we have under our control. So that's one key distinction between a gift culture and a money culture.
Right, which means that money is always moving, or the goods and the services are always moving.
The gift is moving, yeah. In a gift culture, the gift keeps moving. You don't keep it that long. Yeah, it's kind of like a fruitcake, that everyone gives each other at the holidays, and then they don't eat it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how could you just give a brief outline of sort of how that became what we have now? Like what changed?
Well, it's a long story that
Right.
has to do with the growing division of labor and the growing complexity of society and the advent of patriarchy and warfare. It's a long story. And it happened somewhat differently in different places. But basically what happened is that over time, all of these functions that were met through gift became one by one monetized. Even up through the last century, I mean, it has still been happening at an accelerating pace. 100 years ago, for example, entertainment was mostly based on gift. Like, people got together and had fun. They didn't really pay very often for entertainment, except maybe when the vaudeville came to town or something like that. But generally speaking, people made their own music, played their own games, played their own sports, had their own town marching band and sandlot baseball, and kids had their own make-believe games, and they didn't play video games, and people didn't go to gyms, and didn't buy music, so entertainment and recreation and kind of cultural life was something co-created and not purchased. So that's something that's more or less entered the money economy in the last 100 years. And that's just one example. I mean, you can look at almost any domain of human life. A few hundred years ago, it probably wasn't monetized. Like a few hundred years ago, people rarely spent money on food. They produced their own food. They rarely spent money on clothing. They rarely spent money on houses. Everybody knew how to build a house. So this is all migrated into the money realm, which an economist would say has been to our great benefit, because it's much more efficient for a specialist to build everybody's house or to make everybody's clothes in a factory. And therefore, we live in this material abundance. We have, more clothes than your great-great-grandparents ever dreamed of having, and more square footage in our houses, and more appliances, and cars, and just more of everything. But somehow our lives don't seem really any richer experientially.
Right. And one thing that a lot of people list is being missing in their lives now is community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when life is monetized, there is no community. Community isn't just a bunch of people being nice to each other and talking to each other and getting to know each other. Community is the feeling like we're in this together. That I need you and you need me, and we need each other. But if your needs are all met by money, then you don't need each other. The people you need are in, distant factories, distant countries. You don't actually need anybody around you, so no community.
Right. Although that's interesting to look at, because people who are financially well off are often considered to be independent, but they're not really independent. They're just dependent on things that are farther away and people that are farther away.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely an illusion, this, financial independence. I mean, it's this security is based on these symbolic tokens, that we call money, that only have any power at all because of our agreements about them. And as soon as those agreements unravel, your financial security is worth nothing. Lots of people in Greece are discovering this. They thought they were all set up with their pension and everything, and now, gone. That could happen literally overnight. Anywhere. Could happen here.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are waking up to that possibility, at least somewhat.
Yeah. I think our generation is a little less confident in the enduring power of money, investments, Social Security, pensions, 501ks. I don't really have a whole lot of confidence that any investment I make in these things is really going to be there when I retire.
Right. Well, and beyond that, I graduated from college just a handful of years ago. And people who I've graduated from college with, not a whole lot of them have found great paying jobs,
Mm-hmm.
And we're all paying massive amounts of student loans. Or
Yeah.
we're not paying them. They're sitting in forbearance or whatever. But
Yeah.
they're just sitting there.
Yeah, this is like a ticking time bomb. And I think that it could be, I don't know if it'll be student loans or just debt in general, but I think that's what's really going to bring down the system. And it's something that we should really become conscious of, because probably the most powerful form of direct action or people power that we could take in America would be a debt strike. And it's basically that's just at some point everyone's going to be, or not everyone, but enough people are going to say, we're just not going to pay. We can't do it anymore. A lot of them will join it because they can't pay even if they wanted to.
Right.
And others will be just like, I didn't sign up for being a slave to debt for half of my life just to get an education. Why should it be that way? Our parents' generation wasn't like that.
No.
Back then, school was almost free. You could go to UC Berkeley for $200 a year, in the 1960s. It was so cheap.
Yeah.
Why can't we do that anymore? Is it because our society has become poorer? Is it because we are no longer as productive? Is it because the machines that made material comfort so easy have broken down? Is it because we have less technical know-how? No, and we have more of all these things. We're several times more productive. We have computers, and we should be wealthier. It should be even easier than before to have cheap education for everybody. But it hasn't been. There's something really, really wrong here, and we can see where the wealth is going. It's being channeled into fewer and fewer hands, and everybody else has to be in more and more debt. And it shouldn't be this way. We have some sense that after thousands of years of civilization, it shouldn't be getting harder and harder to live. Right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So people, I think that at some point people are going to start feeling pretty indignant about it, and they're no longer going to believe that it's their fault, that this is just the way the world works, and that it's if they're too lazy or not capable enough, then that's why they're stuck in debt. The problem's you. People are going to stop believing that, and I think that we can help raise consciousness around that.
Yeah. Well, it's shame. A lot of people feel a sense of there's something wrong with them because they haven't found a way to make their lives work financially. And finances are considered everything.
Yeah.
If you're not financially making it, you're nobody, practically.
Yeah, and if you can't pay your debts, that's considered shameful too.
Right.
Right. An honorable person is someone who pays his or her debts. David Graeber talks a lot about this, and he wrote this amazing book called Debt: The First 5,000 Years, and it's really a highly scholarly book, but he explores how this attitude came to be, where debt is associated with honor, and he points out that banks and corporations don't feel that at all. If it makes business sense, they're totally fine with walking away from a debt and defaulting. It's only us normal people who feel a sense of responsibility to pay our debts. Corporations, banks, the same banks that are hounding you or your friends to pay their loans, like they'll default perfectly happily.
Right.
But they don't let you do it.
Right.
You can't go bankrupt on your student loans.
No, you can't. There's no way out of them except to die. Not that people, anyway, yeah. Yeah,
Actually,
there's
not
no
even
way out.
dying gets you out of it.
Oh, really? Does it get transferred to your parents or something?
Often it does, yeah. You have to look and see who signed it and everything.
Oh. Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting when you talk about that because, I mean, I just love that idea of the debt strike, because it's an agreement, like you were talking about before. It's an agreement. Money is an agreement, period. So if it's chaining that many people up, once we start to realize that it's kind of this thing that doesn't have to be the way it is at all, it does get tempting to just say, I don't want to participate in this agreement anymore.
Right. And a lot of people already are dropping out. They just don't pay because they can't pay. And the debt collectors come, and there's certain things, there's certain ways to make that process a lot easier on yourself. Resources out there, I think Occupy Wall Street, those folks are kind of working on like booklets and stuff that basically tell you how to drop out of the system and be okay. And so, it's already kind of losing its legitimacy.
Right.
The whole thing. And I talked to recently a relative of mine, a somewhat distant relative, and after high school, kind of one dead-end job after another. So she thought, well, I'll get my degree. And she was, saw these ads for these kind of online programs where you get your BA and promising all of these, promising good jobs and things like that. So she went for it, and then 4 years and tens of thousands of dollars of debt later, she is basically back where she started, still can't get a good job with her, business degree from Phoenix University or whatever it is. And she has tens of thousands of dollars in debt. It's just like this big scam that basically says for the rest of your life, you are going to have to give all of your surplus money to me, to, the bank. You become what was once called a debt peon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on the other, another angle of the whole thing is people's gifts. Like even if you can find work, which a lot of people can't, a lot of times you're left in a situation where you're either ignoring your gifts or you are sacrificing them or you are turning your gifts around for a profit, but something that doesn't really serve you.
Yeah.
Or you're helping to strip more materials from the planet,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole deeper level that isn't really talked about a lot in politics. Everybody's talking about more jobs. But if we take a step back, is more jobs really what the planet needs right now? What about more leisure and less production? Or what about more people doing the kinds of things that they do voluntarily now? Like, mentoring inner city kids or restoring ecosystems, or teaching reskilling people and doing healing work. I mean, there's so much that needs to be done right now that isn't getting done because there's no money in it. Like maybe we need fewer jobs and we need a money system that allows people to not have jobs so that their creative gifts are freed to do what's really needed.
Yeah. That resonates with me a lot.
Yeah.
Let's do
it's
that.
like it's pretty grim, you graduate from college, and then like the grind of life begins. And you might say, well, okay, everyone has to do their part. That would justify it, right? Everybody has to do their part, so maybe life is a grind. But then you say, well, the stuff that I'm grinding away at isn't even really benefiting anybody.
Yeah.
And then it becomes really empty.
Yeah.
And you just want to get out of it. And if you don't get out of it, eventually you'll subconsciously engineer an illness or some kind of breakdown, and you'll get out of it that way.
Right.
You get fired, or the economy collapses. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, it does get to the point where you feel like you're just a cog in a machine, but the machine isn't something that you can believe in. So it's really hard to dedicate any kind of energy or motivation into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the things that they're like, I'm sure, like, for example, this show, I'm sure you're not making huge amounts of money with this, if any, but here you are doing that, which proves that contrary to what economists say, it proves that we do not need the motivation of money in order to work. We're fundamentally creative beings that want to serve and want to express our gifts. And money is actually getting in the way of that for a lot of people. Not everybody, some people are expressing their gifts and doing work that they love and feel that it's meaningful, but fewer and fewer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a number of interests that I feel very passionate about that take a certain amount of time and make zero money.
Right.
And I know a lot of people that do. I'm certainly not alone.
Yeah. And some of those interests that you're talking about might be kind of, self-indulgent, that don't actually contribute to the world, but I bet some of them are pretty important for, other beings, other people, society. Like, I bet some of them are contributory.
Right. Well, and I have a bigger definition of contributory than, a lot of people, because I feel that like genuine artwork that comes from a person's soul can totally shift people's perspectives and bring healing and transformation and all kinds of good things, So it could be seen as selfish, but it's not really. Yeah.
Yeah, life is supposed to be beautiful. Life we should be at least as good as it was for a hunter-gatherer, where maybe 20 hours a week is devoted to subsistence, and most of the rest of the time is devoted to leisure, art, music, play, love, exploration. Why can't we have our lives as good as that?
Right. We
really could. I mean, we have that much leisure pretty much already, but it's called unemployment.
Right.
But if we could somehow, and we can, and that's what my book is about in part, how to kind of distribute this excess leisure, which would be even more if we didn't consume so much effort on things that are unnecessary, weapons and tax accounting, and there's so many things that could easily be eliminated with a few changes to the system. So we could potentially have way, way, way more leisure than we have now, and I think that some of that needs to be turned toward the healing of our ravaged ecosystems. Like, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think that a lot of that excess should just be going toward living more joyfully, having more parties, playing more music, giving more attention to children. When people do that kind of stuff, they find that they don't want to consume as much. Life gets kind of simpler, and people feel more connected to what's real.
Right.
And in that state of connection, all the stuff that, all of our drive to consume and compete and fight kind of dries up.
Well, and I mean, one example that you talked about in the book of a thing that a lot of our resources do go towards, but we don't necessarily need, is the way that we approach healthcare. If we did have that more leisurely health, way of living, we would be out more and we would be less stressed, and we wouldn't need the same amount of healthcare and medication that we do currently. And also we could, also use herbs and other forms of natural healing that aren't nearly as expensive or toxic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another piece that, like, in the mainstream healthcare debate, whatever, single payer, Obamacare, this, that, and other thing, like, that's an aspect that I haven't ever seen, actually, in the media. Like, why are we so sick? Why is the cost of healthcare something like, 20% of GDP? It's because we're sick. And we need, like, all of this. In the present paradigm, we just need more and more and more high-tech medicine and pharmaceuticals to even stay functional. So countries that have maybe half of our healthcare costs, like you go there, it's not because they're using like cheaper medicines, because they're using less medicine. It's because they're healthier. It's because they walk, and they enjoy life more. Like, France, for example, or even Japan, healthcare costs are way less. It's not because they're deficient in technology, So yeah, it's a part of our entire lifestyle. I mean, it's built into the fabric of our society that we get sicker and sicker and spend more and more on healthcare until it becomes unsustainable. And it doesn't really matter. I mean, I think single payer would be a positive development, but it doesn't matter really who's paying for it when these deeper ways of life aren't changing.
Right. And that resonates with the whole piece about addiction, but also the rampant consumerism. And like when you talk about needing to commodify the commons and always create more goods and services so that the economy can always grow so that it can stay stable, because in this economy it has to grow to stay stable the way it's set up right now. And that I'm a big observer of the media. I like analyzing the media, and I'm very interested in media literacy projects and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And when you look into that, there's that shame component again, because you're always being told that you're not enough. You're not enough, and maybe this face wash will help. You're not enough, and maybe these jeans will help. So there's this bringing you down so that you always to try to create an artificial need.
Right.
For things that you don't need.
Yeah. And like these, images of unattainable airbrushed beauty that you compare yourself to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And I think that kind of advertising and that kind of propaganda is effective because it touches on our feeling of being incomplete. I think that when we're living cut off from nature and cut off from community, then it's impossible to feel whole.
Right.
Because we don't have our full complement of relationships that we're supposed to have. And so if you just say if you go off and spend 2 weeks in the woods and then you look at one of those ads, it just seems absurd.
Right.
It has no power to affect you. Yeah, it only works for people who are really alienated to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have had that experience, going and spending a week in the woods and then coming back, and not just advertisements, but everything sort of seems tacky and gaudy and dishonest and just
right.
Icky.
Yeah, everything seems dishonest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like this world of image and not reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have chatted quite a bit about really just a few of the points in your book. Do you want to go into it a little bit about possible solutions?
Sure. We can. I mean, we don't have to cover everything. It's impossible in an hour.
We don't have time for that, but just a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, basically, so, about a third of the book is how we got here and what the essential nature of the problem is with the money system. And then the second third is about systems level solutions. And then the third is about personally aligning with the systems level solutions so that we prepare for them and contribute to the transition. So the solutions, the systems level solutions, are basically they say, well, how could we take the spirit of the gift and translate it into a modern economy, translate it into a world with 7 billion people, with science and technology and a division of labor and a global coordination of expertise. Like, it's not at all clear how that could work in a gift-based system.
Right.
So some people think that I'm advocating abolishing money and that therefore I've got my head in the clouds, but I'm not advocating that at all. I'm advocating how to transform money to be aligned with what is becoming sacred to us. For example, the health of the planet, the health of the water, the soil, the air, biodiversity, human cultures. Today, money is not aligned with these things, but you can make money by destroying these things.
Right.
And because money is just an agreement, we could, in theory, create other agreements about what money is, about how it comes into being, and how it's circulated. We could create other agreements that are aligned with these new values that we're beginning to move into as a civilization. So that's kind of the big picture of what it is. And like some more detailed, so there's maybe about 6 or 7 pillars of a new economic system. And so one of them we kind of touched on a little bit. It's called a social dividend, or a universal basic income, which is basically, an annual income that everybody gets. It's kind of like welfare for everybody at a level of meeting basic needs, so that work no longer becomes a necessity that you have to do to survive, but it's freed to become something, an expression of your creative gift, something that you actually desire to do. Some people, of course, would want to make lots of money, and others maybe would not. The barefoot hippie kind of person, might not really want to make lots of money, and some people are go-getters and they want to be in the thick of the marketplace. So, people could still make money beyond the basic income, but it would take kind of the anxiety that is so ubiquitous that we're like fish in water. We don't know that we're wet. This omnipresent anxiety and scarcity. And so the kind of moral justification for it is that so much of our wealth comes from the wealth of nature and the wealth of cultural accumulation that no one person today has any more right to than anybody else. Like, this wealth is there, partly because of the machines invented by, Thomas Edison. Like, why should one person have more right to enjoy the fruits of those machines than somebody else? Certainly some people can use those better and maybe have the right to enjoy, the fruits of that betterment that person's adding to it. But there's like a base level of wealth that can and should be shared equally. So that's one of the pieces of sacred economics, and it's not. I wouldn't even say it's like the central piece at all. Actually,
right.
The more central pieces are to internalize costs, reclaim the commons, and reverse the interest-based debt system.
Yeah.
And I'm pausing for a breath here because I'm not sure I want to really go into detail on those, just because it turns into too much of a lecture.
Well, it gets pretty complex.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit hard to absorb it. You almost have to sit with it somewhat.
Yeah, especially like on a radio program,
Yeah, and I'm not an economics expert, so I wouldn't be totally comfortable going really in depth on those either. Even though I believe that I, understood it to some degree anyway. I would love to talk just a little bit though about the reclaiming the commons. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you said was that instead of focusing, like, as far as a strategy for what to do right now, just individual people, is instead of focusing on trying to survive within the system, to be thinking about what gifts you can bring to just make the world a more beautiful place and to keep things in the commons.
Yeah. You're kind of bridging two different themes of the book.
Okay.
And this is getting more into what I was saying about that's in the third of the book. Like, how do we personally align with these changes? So the commons is that which properly belongs to everybody and to nobody. and that we all have to take care of, and that we take from it and we give back to it. And that's maybe even how you could look at a human life. We receive and then we give. And without receiving, we have nothing to give, because even our very lives are something that we've received as a gift. You didn't earn being born, right? You didn't earn having water to drink. You didn't earn or create or engineer that rain falls from the sky.
Right.
So we have these tremendous gifts that we want, and we feel on some level gratitude for being alive deep down. Sometimes that gratitude is deeply buried, and we can go years without experiencing it. But then something happens, and all of a sudden it's back, that gratitude to be alive. And when anyone feels that, they desire to devote themselves toward the well-being of others. And I think that we are, because our society is heading toward greater and greater crisis, more and more people are going to be put in touch with what's real and have that experience of crisis and then being glad to be alive. So perhaps part of the transition, is going to be happening on this psychological level, as well as on a systems level. To kind of orient spiritually to an economy that implements the principles of gift, we can step into the gift ourselves. And it's really just a matter of you can just even wake up every morning and just for a few seconds say a little mantra to yourself. Say, today I will be sensitive to what I am called to give. And also, I will be gratefully accepting of what I am called to receive or what I am given. So it's not about heroic self-sacrifice, but it's about kind of tuning in to opportunities to give where it's kind of like what you want to do, but maybe there's some fear in the way. Like, will I be okay if I give this? And can I afford the time? Can I afford the money? But there's that opportunity, and it's calling. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how I guess the reason I was bridging those together is because you had talked about in the book about how the commons are not just the earth or the things made out of the earth, but how they're also the efforts of our labors. Mm-hmm. So the things that people do and create. And so choosing to not add that to the commodification process, I guess.
Yeah.
That's how I was thinking about it. But maybe I added something right there.
Well, no, it is connected. I do that with my work. I put it. I don't use normal copyrights for my work, but I have a Creative Commons copyright, which allows free reproduction, but disallows, making copies and selling the copies. Or I just basically just put it in the public domain, And people usually ask my permission anyway before copying it, but sometimes they don't. And like the Ascent of Humanity was read out loud on a radio station, and I don't remember actually giving permission for that, but I was delighted that it was happening. and they actually didn't need permission, because at the beginning of my book I had where there's usually a copyright notice, I had different verbiage there that said basically, you are free to reproduce this through any means that you want, mechanical, electronic, they have that whole statement, and I kind of tweaked it, and I said, go ahead, do anything you want with it. And I think that, I don't know, I think that the book would be a lot less powerful if the medium and the message were in conflict.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer. And thankfully my publisher with the Ascent of Humanity, it was no problem because I self-published it. But this one, is published by North Atlantic Books, which is I wouldn't call them mainstream, but they're pretty tapped in. They're a medium-sized, fairly mainstream publisher. But they went along with it, much to their credit. So I think that, that's just one way that we can, when I tap into, this is a gift. Like all the ideas in the book, they came as a gift. Either I read them somewhere, or they came up in a conversation, or I was just going for my walk and they popped into my head. There they are, right? It's a gift. So I don't feel like, it doesn't feel good to kind of not pass that on as a gift. You said it before, the gift wants to circulate. And so I pass it on as a gift, and then people, if they want, they can buy a print copy and gift me that way. Although I don't get very much when that happens, but sometimes people go to my website and voluntarily pay for reading it online. Or when I do events, usually it's, the attendees decide how much to pay. So, I'm kind of exploring how to live in a money world from the spirit of the gift. Not that I'm perfect at it or anything, or pure or anything like that, but it's kind of, I think a lot of people are doing these experiments.
Well, it's really challenging to try to pull that off, just because the alternatives aren't entirely there yet. I mean, you talked in the book about different places that there's seeds of those alternatives, but they're not fully fleshed out yet. And a lot of people who are, writers or spiritual leaders or that sort of thing are in a tough position, because they, you want your work to be accessible. And in your case, you're very interested in the spirit of the gift, but at the same time, you do have to survive. Yeah.
But I mean, I get plenty of money, here I am. Like, it's not like I'm getting rich or anything, but I feel well supported. And I think that it works. Like, people say, well, does it work? Or will it work for me? I think that one thing that contaminates it and makes it not work is if somewhere in the back of your mind there's the following narrative that says, oh, heroic me, giving it all as a gift, and those people out there, they don't see it. They're not going to give, and they don't give as much back as I'm giving out, and I'm sacrificing myself, and therefore I'm so good, so committed, so heroic. It's kind of this martyr complex where there's like almost a psychological satisfaction of it not working.
Uh-huh.
And if there's any of that woundedness, then people will detect, unconsciously, they will detect that your gift is manipulative. And they won't really want to give back. It doesn't feel clear, it doesn't feel open. And I think most of us, to some degree, have that wound, which is quite natural in our money system, which has, I'm going to take advantage of you, built into it. Because we're all in competition with each other for never enough money. We're all set into enmity with each other, just by the mathematics of the system.
Right.
Yeah. So healing that is a big job. And yeah.
Yeah. And I read your book online on your website, chapter by chapter. And, I didn't feel guilty about it. I mean, I saw that there's an opportunity to pay, and I'm currently not able to, so I chose not to, but I didn't feel manipulated into it. Like, I just felt like, okay, this is being offered because it's worth offering.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I'm glad you had that experience.
Yeah. But you feel like, would you say that, as far as when you were talking about it working, would you say that it's that, like, because you're open to those gifts, then gifts come to you, and so there's sort of that energetic flow?
Yeah. Like, I do think that there is something to that, law of attraction stuff. It has huge flaws, too.
Right.
And I don't even think it's necessarily useful as a practice. And I could go into, there's like 3 or 4 like big flaws in applying it, at least the way that it's usually applied. But it does seem to, I do get the sense that I'm going to be taken care of. Unless I'm not. And like, that's kind of okay too. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But right now it feels good to operate from that place I'm just going to give freely of my gifts, and it'll come back. And that doesn't mean that, like, if somebody says, "Hey, Charles, we'd like you to speak at our conference. We'll pay you $3,000." I'm not going to say no. I just do it by the gift. Like, I would see that as a gift.
Right.
I say, "Thank you. That's a beautiful gift," and it makes me feel very welcome, and it makes me feel that my gift is valued. And as a gift giver, you want to give your gift to those who really need it and will appreciate it, even if that gift is a fruitcake or something. You want to give it to the one who likes fruitcake.
Right.
So money isn't the only way that can be communicated to me, that my gift is deeply wanted and richly received, but it is one way.
Right. And I was definitely not attempting to try to associate it with the sort of standard idea of law of attraction, because I do have some bones with it as well. One is that it doesn't take into account the nature of the money system as you talk about it in your book.
Right.
The interest, what interest does to how money works, and the commodification of the commons, all that stuff is usually not taken into account.
Yeah. And also, that's one problem with the law of attraction as it applies to money. Although you could say that if everybody adopted that abundance mentality, then the money system would have to change to reflect it. Because ultimately, the money system is built upon our psyche. To me, the main reason that the law of attraction is not always useful is that beliefs are not something that we can change that easily. Usually, you cannot change beliefs through an act of will. And they imply, beliefs, reality conforms to beliefs. So all you have to do is change your beliefs, which is easy, right? Because that's just in your head, right? But it isn't actually just in your head. A state of belief is a state of being. And affirmations and mantras, they only work if the state of being associated with the old beliefs is in a transition process. So in those times when you're really ready for the new belief, because you've undergone some changes, usually following a crisis of some sort, then those techniques can be effective. But if there's still something underneath that needs to be healed before you're ready for the new beliefs, then it just isn't going to work. We're not the masters of our beliefs. Beliefs are more of a symptom of deeper things.
That makes sense to me. And I feel like we could talk about that for a long time, but but we're coming to the end of the hour. Is there anything else you would like to talk about that you feel like was kind of important for us to cover? Because we couldn't cover everything, but
no. I think it's been good. People got kind of a taste of the breadth of the work. I mean, there's something in it for kind of policy nerds, who are really interested in money systems and how do we do this. And then there's more of what you might call the spiritual level or the psychological level. Like, how does the institution of money invade our brains and our cultural DNA? Cool. I think we got a good taste of it.
Awesome. So I think we should let people know how to find your work.
Yeah, the main hub would be charleseisenstein.net.
Okay. Yeah, and there's links on there to all your books and blog and.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep. Well, it was a delight, Epiphany.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So have fun with Robin next, right?
Yeah, it's Robin. Yep. Yeah. I'll plug that real quick. Robin Gunkel is coming up next. She is the organizer for Evolver Baltimore, and she was also part of creating the B Note, which is an alternate currency in Baltimore. So if everybody could stay tuned, it'll just be a couple minutes till I'm back on. We are now on the phone with Robin Gunkel. Robin is the organizer for Evolver Baltimore. She was also part of creating the B-Note, which is an alternate currency in Baltimore, and she's a poet and just general writer as well. How are you today, Robin?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show, Epiphany. It's a real honor to be on the show with you. Another person who's done some organizing in her city, and after Charles Eisenstein, I'm a huge fan of his work. So this is cool.
Yay! It's an honor for me as well. I'm very excited to talk to you. And you mentioned the organizing. I'm not doing it anymore, but I was the organizer for Evolver Asheville. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, being we're talking about that, how about let's talk about Evolver first, and then we'll switch over to other things.
Sure. Right now we're working on a mushroom art festival at an urban farming collective called the Baltimore Free Farm, it's located in the city. And we're going to have, hopefully, we're working on this, fruiting mushroom sculptures and in art from people around the city, representational of mushrooms, but also thematically related, integrating it into the gardens at the Free Farm, but also having an art show inside with music during the day and a party at night. We're building a mushroom cafe out back of the Free Farm for people to hang out at. And just trying to create a community experience for people to educate them more about mushrooms and how mushrooms can be used to save the world.
To save the world.
So I've been hugely inspired by Paul Stamets' work, and if people are unfamiliar with his work, they can just Google Stamets 6 Ways Mushrooms Can Save the World. There's an excellent 13-minute TED Talk where he goes through and he talks about how mushrooms can be used in mycoremediation, to eat oil and create living and sustainable environments. After the mushrooms have been grown, they can be used in place of insecticides. They can be used for, he's making an argument to save the old growth forests because of the medicinal properties of mushrooms. And so that there's multiple aspects that people don't realize that we can actually, there's species that we can align ourselves with to do a lot of really good work and address some of the very difficult issues that we're facing right now.
Wow. So we've been talking for like 2 minutes, and I feel like there's about 12 topics I want to dig into deeper already. So let's start with what you last mentioned and work backwards. So mushrooms.
Okay. Mushrooms.
You mentioned very briefly that they eat oil, and that's something that I just learned recently, but is fascinating.
Yeah, it is. There's been a mushroom found in the Amazon that eats plastic. I don't know an extensive amount. A lot of the information that I take in, I know enough to then organize events and try to bring in other people that are experts and, get community interest around things. So I have a general knowledge, just from watching Paul Stamets, TED Talks and, reading his book, Mycelium Running and, hearing him speak at Burning Man. But when you come across information like this and it's so world changing, you want to share it with other people and try to disseminate it so that they can integrate that into their own lives. So if we had, more people that are growing mushrooms and, have life boxes, something that Paul Stamets talks about, the life box that you can grow an old growth forest from. And just in general, thinking about the interconnections of our ecosystems, and then with the festival, bringing it back to the interconnection of our community.
Yeah, and I think it's a real gift to bring stuff like that to people, and I think it's totally okay to admit that you're not an expert on everything. Because nobody is. Nobody is. I don't expect you to know the science of mushrooms, but it's really neat that you bring it to people. And even that we can talk about it right now, because I don't know the science of it either, but I know that it happens, and that's pretty awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, they can eat oil, they can eat plastic, and to me that's really fascinating in the sense of a lot of times I feel like with the kind of culture that we're in, what Charles and I were talking about, in our hugely monetized culture where we have all these consumer goods, and it comes from the story of being separate from nature. But then to think that these things that we create, plastic, which is created from natural things, but it seems pretty unnatural, but that nature still has a way of providing for that problem. That's just so fascinating.
Yeah, that there's built-in systems to deal with toxins. And just that a lot of the crisis that we face is a crisis of consciousness in a sense, in that recognizing design solutions that to a degree can help us really transform our world, but also, to change changing the way that we connect with each other too, and the process is the other part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the consciousness, piece of it is a really big part of what Evolver does.
Mm-hmm.
Is really just raising awareness about things and helping people become awake to solutions, especially, but sometimes problems too.
Right. Daniel Pinchbeck has described it as a street university, and I find that like a really empowering way to think of Evolver, and that it's interdisciplinary in nature. So it's allowing us to make connections between mushrooms and, shamanism and ecosystems and peak oil, and seeing all of these different things inward and outward. And, that in our culture, we're taught to think of things in like discrete subject matters, and that they're these separate things, but that they're all connected together, and we're looking at different aspects of the same thing.
Yeah.
Seeing them through different lenses, and that the more that we can build our interdisciplinary thought processes, the more that we can begin to effectively problem solve and work together.
Yeah, absolutely. The problems are connected to each other, and the solutions are connected to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. How long have you been an organizer for Evolver?
Since June 2009. So it's been a little over 3 years. It's been pretty life-changing. Undergone a lot of personal changes. It's cool to see the personal changes beside the community changes, and knowing that they grow beside each other is a powerful thing.
Well, it's leadership as a journey. Like, I know when I was doing it, it was the leadership process was a huge journey just by itself.
Yes, absolutely. And it's like, and it keeps it's like being in a video game, and then you hit like this next level, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've done all this stuff, and I have like you feel like you have some kind of new superpowers, but then the challenges are also bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which describes personal growth, period, as well. But I love that. I love that. And most of our generation grew up with video games, so that analogy makes sense.
Yeah. Oh.
So tell me just a few of the kinds of events that you've done with Evolver Baltimore.
Sure. Well, let's see. We did a shamanism event 3 years ago, where we had a screening of Dean Jeffrey's Shamans of the Amazon. We had a band called Helicopter Dude that made their own instruments, like out of just found materials like PVC pipe and just eclectic things that they played after the screening, and we had a discussion, food, but that it was really just a way to bring people together to talk about ideas that they hadn't had an expression or venue for before. Baltimore is a more, I want to say industrial, but maybe that's its history. It's more like traditionally a kind of blue collar town, and it's very, it has a lot of social struggle to it. It has a lot of real struggle, and it's important to hold space for other alternative kind of ideas. But what I really love about organizing here is that it's still also very grounded because of the nature of our city. And I mean, in a sense, half of Baltimore's collapsed because of the war on drugs and just a tremendous amount of poverty. But at the same time, there's an incredible rejuvenation of arts that's happening here, and that people have a real sense of community because we're not necessarily distracted by lots of other things. We create a lot of our own events. And so there's a lot, I would say, more social capital here, and people valuing each other more. And kind of tying in with what Charles spoke about in the last hour,
totally.
About community, that we used to entertain each other. And I think that there's a lot of that here. So there's seeing that side by side,
Yeah, there's a lot of what you said that very directly relates to what Charles and I talked about. Not only refinding that community in the face of economic collapse, but also the gifts, like you were talking about, what was it, Helicopter Dude?
Yeah,
you know, making own instruments and that sort of thing. It's about like gifts, people's gifts, and finding ways of expression and connection, and sort of finding a way of being, just being period, but then also being together in a way that's separate from the machine, as he does call it in his book. So it's very much about a lot of the same principles.
Definitely, yeah. And that you see a lot of that here, that there's a lot of value in what's found, what's recycled, what's reused, and that it comes out of the sense that the corporate structure has to a large degree failed in Baltimore, and that people find value in, I guess, what has like real like patina and intrinsic value. And I think that there's more a sense of real wealth, what has real value.
I love that. That sounds so beautiful. It makes me want to move to Baltimore.
Oh, we'd love to have you here.
So yeah, again, I mean, it does connect with things we were talking about with Charles, is like the renewal of the reusing of materials. Is the materialism is a different thing that a lot of people think about. Like we say we live in a material culture, but we don't value the materials we have. We have throwaway trash.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's, honoring all of that.
Yeah.
So
I think about that a lot, like tying back in like with my grandmother's values, and it's nice that I see that carry through from like her Depression era values, and that being imparted in me when I was a child, and then seeing that that's my value system now is cool.
Yeah, I've thought about that as well. I remember when I was a kid having a conversation with my grandma, and she was talking about how what she thought the perfect life was staying home with the kids. I mean, she lived on a farm. She raised kids on a farm. Having your own garden so that you don't need to buy food, and just, really taking care of your own needs. And then you don't necessarily need to have your own job if you don't want to. And she wasn't trying to necessarily push any particular gender values on me. But she was just trying to suggest that, you don't have to have that other way of doing things. Like, you can be self-reliant, and it's a really joyful way to live.
Sure.
And I remember
that was her empowerment.
Yeah, and I really resonated with it at the time. I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Just being able to take care of yourself that way. And that was so normal, to grow your own food. And, if your socks get a hole, you mend your socks. You don't buy brand new socks.
Right. Darn your socks. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it seems like a lot of what you're doing with Evolver is really embodying those new values. And then this mushroom festival, when is it happening?
October 6th and 7th.
October 6th and 7th.
With a party in the evening on the 6th. And we have some musicians who've confirmed that they're going to play. It's going to start with punk rock. That's the culture of the free farm, and we wanted to embody and like honor that culture too, and that as much as possible, but for it to be like a cross-cultural like kind of event, that it's not just the consciousness like niche of the city, but to try to expand out a little bit further. So it's going to start with a couple of punk rock bands. Ahab's Revenge is confirmed. And then it's going to move slowly over to electronic. And we have Dynasty Electric as one of our transitioning bands. And Jenny, her voice sounds like Kate Bush, and she plays theremin, but they're like punk, like psychedelic rock. And we're going to end with Aligning Minds, which is just like pure soulful IDM, just really kind of like a ethereal, deep sound. So it'll be an interesting transition and journey through the night. But we're really trying to make the festival interesting for everyone in the party, that if people aren't necessarily into the music, they can go outside and like chill out in our mushroom cafe, and we'll have like light up luminaries and, just like a space for people to meet each other.
That sounds really magical.
Yeah. So I'm excited, and it's a lot of work. And there's like 3 of us that are really working intensely on planning it at the moment, and we're realizing how much it entails to organize a festival. It's kind of nonstop until then, but we realize that it'll come together too. It's just gonna, be full effort until then. But also, and something just to put out there for the audience, is that we would love help. We'd love help with organizing, with people who want to make art. You can email mushroomcityartfestival@gmail.com if you'd like to make a contribution. And also, like other people to just be on the festival, but just to help us organize in the city. That one thing that's fallen off is the regular sport, and that's really important to hold as a discussion space for people to be able to continue come together and share ideas. And so if we had other people to help us organize, and we could have like a regular sport every month leading up to the festival or in the future, like that would be incredible to build that kind of base here.
Yeah. How big is your organizing team?
It's really 3 of us at the moment. It's been in flux. There was a much larger team a year and a half ago. And honestly, there was a little bit of interpersonal drama. And also with the launch of the B Note, a lot of energy went into the B Note, but there was kind of, if I'm using the right word, a mitosis, like a cell division that happened.
Okay.
And and so that the B Note was like a newer, like emerging project that also needed like a lot of volunteer support. And it was just natural for some people to transition over to doing that. Yeah.
Well, different kinds of projects sometimes call to different people. So I think sometimes there's just a natural process that happens as people need to follow their own path, for what their skills are. With the remaining team, do you divide it up by skills? Like, do you all kind of have the same jobs, or do you divide it up by things that you like and or are good at?
Oh, geez. Yeah, it would make sense if we had like allotted like positions, like things that we did, like if we had one person for advertising and, one person like organizing like art submissions. And it's actually just so much at this point that we're just kind of like all working on like different pieces of the picture. But that's something that should happen going forward, to gain that kind of organization so that we have more sustainability moving forward.
Well, and it definitely takes time to set that up and figure it out. Because sometimes you think you're drawn to one area, but it's not really what you enjoy doing.
That's true. That's true. And that's its own organizing project, too. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say, like for you personally, is the hardest thing about being an organizer?
It's just the balance between working a full-time job, organizing, and also being a writer. I found that a lot of times the writing is the last thing that I come back to, and that's been a little bit difficult because I've always identified myself as a writer, since I was a kid, that it was challenging to think that I'd actually encountered something that was pulling me away from, what I believed would be my profession in the world and what I would always continue to do. So recently, I found that it's all connecting back together again, and that all of this work is leading back into the writing.
Very cool.
Yeah. So you linked to one of my pieces on Reality Sandwich, and I'm actually working on another piece. It's a little slow going. I've been getting up in the mornings to write, and it's more stream of consciousness. But after the festival's over, I see that as like one of like the main projects to get done, and I feel that the festival is actually going to tie into the piece and that processing. I've been reflecting a lot on mycelium. What's that?
I said I can't wait to read that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And I've just been reflecting a lot on mycelium and seeing that as like a metaphor just across everything. And so in your interview with, Charles Eisenstein, talking about interconnections and the breakdown of interconnections with capitalism. And that's something that I've been giving a lot of thought to, that essentially it's a commodification of Indra's web. And it's a breakdown of I would say the oneness of everything into the sense that we're all separate, which is a very key element in his work and something that the two of you talked about extensively.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that, very, very isolating experience to think that we're all alone, and then acquiring lots of things to make up for a sense of isolation.
Yeah,
absolutely. So it's this weird materialism, very, very Kali Yuga. Yeah, the Dark Mother.
I'd like to talk about your writing in just a minute, but I kind of would like to finish up talking about Evolver first.
Okay.
With what you were just saying, Evolver, one thing I like about it is how it does bring so many different things together. It's sort of reversal of that isolation of ideas. Like the event you were talking about with the Mushroom Festival, all the different arts and events and ideas that you're bringing into that is sort of a way of reintroducing to people that interconnectedness. Do you find it challenging to reach out to different kinds of groups, or do you find that it's usually pretty easy to get the kind of reception you want?
I find it's pretty easy to reach out to people. A lot of people, they want to be connected with, so for example, we worked with Occupy, or actually we had a member of the Occupy Arts and Culture Committee, and then we had another organizer who was with us just for this specific event, and it was her idea. Her name's Shan White. But we did this event called Craftivism, Occupy the Future, and we held it at a space in Southwest Baltimore, which is an area that's crumbled a lot because of the war on drugs, but it's a community space where people would go to have coffee for free and study, attend study sessions for their GEDs. But they opened it up for us, and we set up different workshop spaces for people to learn how to sew and how to knit and silk screen and make patches. And, of course, with the Occupy camps, it was really difficult for people, a few weeks into the occupation, because a lot of the social problems that we see in our larger culture were part of the Occupy camps and really kind of condensed there in some of the camps, because there's a lot of people with a lot of need who went there, and that was difficult for people to contain, and that it was constant. It was work, and a lot of trying to figure out what they were doing, but not enough time for play or time for connection, and that was one of that event held space for people so that they could connect together and just to have fun and, be able to, express themselves and, learn skills and sew patches on their clothes. And it was cool. We had people, from all ages. We had, grandmothers, knitting beside young children, and it was a really good event that allowed us to it was to embody a different kind of activism. And I think that that's important, that there's also a yin frontier to activism as well, in terms of the way that we connect together. And I think that when I say yin frontier, that's an idea I think a lot about in my writing, but that's kind of like the mycelial connection of the community, that's like the space that receives and holds ground for other things to emerge.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. So would you feel comfortable sharing something you've written or are working on right now?
Oh, sure. I would love to. I have some pieces picked out. I wonder, sometimes my poetry is a little hard to digest because it's a lot of images and it moves quickly. So I might read one of them, and then maybe I'll pick some other things that are kind of like I write in different styles. But I do have one that's my most recent poem, and it's a cut up of Margaret Atwood and just some writing I found online about rainbow herbicides and some advertising, some pine sol advertising that's marketed to lower income women, and like the pine sols all have like different colors and like cartoon characters like assigned to them, and then descriptions of the cartoon characters. And I use some of the language from that as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
that sounds great.
Okay. It's called Vagrant Speculations on Mutating Means. You can forget who you are if you're alone too much. Lavender Clean loves taking the time to stop and smell the designer perfume. Counter the insurgency, the luxuriant riot of foliage and fruit. If one conceives of a farm as a factory or a forest as a farm, listening as animals do, the pattern for an unknown sound, a silence opening like a crack in rock. She's there for anyone who needs a hug, a dose of common sense, or a deadly cocktail of Roundup. What would anyone down there on the sidewalk think if they saw her talking to a swarm of bees? Vagrant speculations on mutating means. As for writing, it was dangerous, said the Adams and the Eves. Beware of words. Be careful what you write. Morning dove, robin, crow, blue jay, bullfrog. A plant and its pests are continually co-evolving. The impurity 2, 3, 7, 8, tetrachloride dibenzene p-dioxin PCBD. Oodle, oodle, ooh. Oodle, oodle, ooh. Chirp, twerp, aw, I, whom, baroom. A form of chemical warfare in which the objective is to destroy the plant-based ecosystem of an area. Luckily, she hadn't ended up sucked into a puree and battered to a pulp. Her neural connections for sex are blocked. Cerebral cortex, the locus of her higher order thought. This is the moment that science terms the Big Bang. The fertility of the soil decreases as earthworms and vital organisms are killed off. Strange fruit that looked and tasted like God's first drafts. A swarm of bees in May, worth a cool day. A swarm of bees in June, worth a new moon. In a dance of resistance and conquest that can have no ultimate victor, she turns to the dark encircling wall of trees and vines and fronds. When the going gets tough, the tough go exfoliate. Why not someone younger, someone with more optimism and fresher cells? Only you can prevent forests and jungles by 30 to 75%. A suspected carcinogen that may have affected the health of over 17,000 United States servicemen. The small print on the label also brought the disconcerting news. Hodgkin's lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and certain leukemias. You can always tell your troubles to the bees. Mine mouth with a plant full of green peas. It's only birdsong.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah. So, thank you.
And so the only thing I don't like about radio is that there's not really a place for silence. Like, because I kind of want to sit and just like think about that a little bit, you know?
Oh, definitely. Just to have a space to receive it.
Yeah, but there was so much in there, and that really spoke to me a lot. Mm-hmm. Just modernization and commercialization, and being told what we want and what we need, but at the same time feeling the urges to just connect, like the mind meld with the green. Like that's really beautiful. I love it. Thank you for sharing it.
Oh yeah. Thanks for asking me to read my poetry. Yeah. Would you like me to read a couple more? Or do you feel radio format with poetry?
No. I do want to hear, I think one more, because that way we'll still have time to, have time to chat more too.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not watching time at all. So, okay. This next one is called, Atom Like an Atom Ricochet Naming.
Okay.
Bird, shin, breath, bee, brain, radio, invisible, electricity, earth, air, man, beast, fire, cardinal, wing, beak, flesh, skin, breath, breast, stomach, orchid, bee, hope, box, lock, key, he, she, home, village, city, state, country, border, inside, outside, us, them, fire, 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 rain on your parade, flight, cloud, mushroom, billow, ink, rain, blotted, stars, armchair apocalypse, reduced fat apocalypse, high in fiber apocalypse. You can't do that on television apocalypse. Good to the last drop apocalypse. Ring around the collar apocalypse. I can't believe it's not butter apocalypse. Gatorade is thirst aid apocalypse. Kills bugs dead apocalypse. Don't hate me because I'm beautiful apocalypse. How many licks does it take to get to the center of apocalypse? Apocalypse. It's magically delicious.
I love that. Would you be willing to talk about that apocalypse a bit?
Sure. I mean, so I wrote this 3 years ago, and I guess the primary drive in writing it was seeing the world broken apart in language, and that the world was whole before language broke things into things. And so getting this invention of language and how that can turn into something destructive, something that we experience very, very outside of ourselves. And all of the like I watched a lot of television as a child. Television was probably like my babysitter, and so I feel like my home was well, there's a lot to go into there, but I'll say that my mother has schizophrenia, and she slept most of the time through my childhood because she was over medicated. And so just kind of experiencing very much like the kind of the brokenness of things, and seeing just how much of like the media that I absorbed, and seeing that in some sense as an end of the world, an end of the world in this like constant barrage of media, which is also in different language that you and Charles talked about, but I also spoke about that, with like the billboards being this fake reality that you perceived more directly when you came back from the woods. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then, if nature is the place where maybe things feel more whole, but then at the same time, what is really nature now? Where is wilderness? I went camping with some friends in May, and just heard like gunshots off in the distance, and it occurred to me, it was like, a park that we went to experience an illusion of wilderness, but to some extent, real wilderness doesn't exist anymore. And that's a very pessimistic thought, and it's good to have that kind of analysis, but then I think to also kind of bring that back into, I don't know, alignment with other things too, because otherwise it can become easy to focus too much on the negative.
Right. Yeah. I would like to touch on it just a little bit, but I think I read recently that in the United States there's only like 2 places anymore that you can go and not record any man-made noises.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's just because they travel so far, so that doesn't necessarily mean you're hearing them. Because there are places that are somewhat wild, like the Appalachians. There's definitely areas on there. But I think you're right too. Is you can only dwell on it so much. You also have to focus on things like community and positive changes that are being created and manifested. It's thank you for sharing about your mom. I know that sometimes that can be hard.
Yeah, it does. It does figure a lot into my work, and just I would say that I guess I experienced a lot of freedom as a child because I didn't have people really watching closely over me, and that I think I feel fortunate now, although it sucked then, but I feel fortunate now for that freedom because it taught me to be independent, and I can see some positives in it now. But to just recognize that we're all experiencing different aspects of a broken culture, and that we're all wounded in some way from this culture, and that a lot of the challenge that we face is having to heal first ourselves before we can heal the world, because we're not able yet to respond to the world because we haven't had the opportunity to fully nurture and take care of ourselves. Right. And that we can become very upset with people's apathy, or lack of political literacy, but that this is also the product of the brokenness of the culture that people need to take some responsibility for, but then also seeing how that's been created through that system too.
Right. Well, and that's one of those macrocosm, microcosm kind of deals. Like our culture is so broken that our families are broken, for a lot of us anyway. My mother also experienced quite a bit of mental illness, although she wasn't medicated at all. So that's a slightly different thing, but similar, because that's sort of a fragmented reality. But the media that you we're set in front of is kind of a fragmented reality too. So we all have to do our own healing. And it's actually kind of interesting. Like if you look at permaculture principles, they're pretty similar to personal self-growth principles. Like that's when you get into like some of the parallels of different healing systems being like related, because they all kind of follow similar patterns. So it's kind of,
it makes sense. Yeah,
it's kind of fun to think about.
Right, and integrated systems. Yeah.
So art and writing, it seems like both are a pretty big part of your life, both through your organizing and your personal creative work. How do you feel that those figure into the changes that are happening?
Oh, that's a good question. I know that I've been intrigued by some of Daniel Pinchbeck's writing on this, and how he wrote an essay called Business Shamanism, but he also talked about how art was ineffectual to rattle the chains of the status quo. But then there is an art such as I went to the Boom Festival in Portugal a few weeks ago, Visionary Festival, and those kind of experiences can be rites of passage for people. And that's actually somewhere where I have an interest, because I perceive to some extent, if it's done well, if we can do it well, the Mushroom Festival could potentially be for some people a rites of passage experience that we lack in our culture, but to give people very real and authentic experiences, because there's a dearth of authentic experiences in consumer culture. And looking at festivals like Burning Man, that people go out there to have a true rites of passage, and that there's a sense of a real frontier to be experienced that we're unable to experience in our daily lives. And so that makes a huge impact. And people realizing, festivals like Burning Man, that they can be the center of activity and the expression of art themselves. And that's very self-empowering. It'd be great to see, it expresses itself differently in different cultures, and we're talking about I'm talking about visionary culture right here. But I'm interested in learning more about how that seeks expression in other cultures too.
That makes sense. And I love what you said about people being in the middle of the creation of the art. Because for me, that's one of the issues with our current culture, is that we have famous people who make art, or, quote unquote art. And sometimes it's just really regurgitated commercialism. But whatever, we all look up to them, and there's this thing of fame that America is obsessed with fame. But like, in my opinion, it's really about, like, we need to be the artists, and we need to have the communities so we can have that sense of recognition at the more intimate level. And that's what we're really craving there.
Absolutely. And I think that desire for fame, like, Milan Kundera, wrote about it, like the sense of immortality, but I think it's also kind of in a fear of death too, which ties in again with the consumer culture. But to let that go and recognize that we can all be co-creators together. And that we're authors of our own lives and not consumers. That can be pretty world altering for people. I just remember viewing the world through television when I was a child, and disconnected to violence because I was so used to seeing it on TV. And of course, this is something that all of us have experienced growing up in this culture, and that we're seeing break more and more to the surface as things are starting to also fall apart a bit too. And, and Charles Eisenstein talks about the old stories starting to break down. And so we see in some ways some collapses, but then there are also opportunities and openings of space for other things to happen too.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you sent me a link to was that article you wrote about... Oh, yeah. Sorry, it's just taking me a second to remember what it was called. But about the installation art.
Oh, right.
I'm trying to remember the name of the article. I'm looking it up. Yeah. Luminous intervention.
I was so excited when I found out that they were using projection as installation to highlight social injustice, and giving kind of sort of peeling back layers of history, projected on buildings in the city, and giving you the history of the building, in context to people's lives and what that social struggle was at the time, and the city, moving to, it's the super block, and to either tear down some of these buildings and turn them into shopping centers, and that it was a really amazing way to highlight the social injustice that's happening in the city. And I love that it literally is shedding light on darkness. That the installations themselves do exactly that. And then it's a walking tour. And they did a walking tour at the Visionary, or excuse me, the Transmodern Festival in April. And, you know, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of artists in Baltimore, but there's also a lot of activists. And it's amazing to see the art and the activism coming together, and that the activism can be more powerful when it has that artistic message with it, and that it really roots itself into people's minds and is able to bring ideas across more clearly.
And I also find it interesting because it changes the way people think about their physical space.
Yes.
So, like,
yes,
the fact
definitely.
that these things are being projected onto buildings, which breaks rules that nobody even thought of writing, but like it breaks this sense of conformity and of rule following. It seems like.
Right. That you can have an active dialogue with the space, and it's not just a space that you're being funneled through.
Right. You don't have. They didn't have permission to do. In this case, with the article that you wrote about it, they. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No. So the first installation, I didn't know it happened, and I wanted to be able to make it to there. But they projected on a shopping mall in the Inner Harbor. And, you know, and they went, and it was kind of, I mean, I guess you could call it was guerrilla art. And to hopefully, you know, to some extent to raise consciousness of the people that are entering through that shopping center, and to, you know, get them to think outside of, you know, just that consumer mindset, but that, you know, who actually owns the space that they're doing their shopping at, and, you know, what other, you know, contexts you know, are things happening within the city, that we lose so much, like we lose external interconnection, but we lose so much internal interconnections too, which comes down again to that like interdisciplinary thinking, but just seeing so much how people are politically disengaged, and I think that it's intimidating for people. They don't know where to find their space with it. But also not necessarily seeing how these pieces connect together and directly affect their lives, and people feeling that they're just you know, that they're isolated from each other and isolated in their own, you know, existence. Sorry, that's not directly about luminous intervention, kind of tying into that broader picture. Right?
Oh, I love it. I love that. And I was going to say, it seems like that is what art can do. Like, that's one of the greater potentials of art, is just to make you feel less alone, to cut away that isolation and have the sense of I'm human, having a human experience, and I can connect to other people's experiences. Right.
And that, you know, and things exist outside of financial value. They can be created just for, you know, the sake of beauty or whimsy or humor. But they can exist just to be themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a really amazing art exhibit here last spring, and it was called Rooms Play, and it transitioned people between, I think, like 24 different rooms, where they had actors in each room that you interacted with, in this connected story transitioning between, and you got to experience like the otherness of being an immigrant in the country. And then from each room you experienced different dimensions of this as you moved through the play, but you were still the center of the play, and it was like being birthed through the vagina of art was my end experience with it.
I love the description and the idea of that. Yeah, that's neat. Like, that's really interactive.
Yeah. So it'd be cool to, I don't know, to work with these groups like the Copycat Theater, who puts these productions on, or, you know, simply to be, you know, growing beside them, you know, in this community, and just, you know, changing those spaces and experiences for people.
Yeah, that does sound really fun. So, for the last part of the show, I was kind of thinking we could just a little bit talk about the B note.
Sure.
If you're okay with that. And then maybe finish off with a poem.
Yeah.
And if there's anything else you want to talk about in there, let me know. Because it's not a definite time ending. It's a little bit arbitrary.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
We don't have to feel like, oh, time's up. I'm going to finish mid-sentence. We can finish what we want to say.
Okay.
Was there anything else you wanted to talk about besides the B note and like a poem?
No, I mean, I feel that, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to be able to talk about what organizing Evolver is like and how that connects in with the larger picture of the city and, and personal spaces. And yes, I'd be glad to talk about the B note and finish up with some poetry.
Cool. I'm glad you're feeling pretty happy with our discussion, like what we've covered. I find you really inspirational, like the number of things that you do and how connected you are with sort of alternate ways of being. So I'm very excited to have had you on the show.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you're very inspiring too.
Aw. Okay, so tell me a little bit about the B note.
Okay. So the B note, we launched it in April as of last year, and it's a local currency. It's you exchange in $10 and you receive 11 B notes. If you exchange your money back out, you receive $9 or 9 B notes for $10. So there's a 10% incentive to keep your money in the B note. We have our current count is 170 businesses, local businesses that accept the currency. Not necessarily like for an entire purchase, but will receive some percentage of the purchase in B notes. We have about 28,000 in circulation. And one of the ideas is to build local supply chains. So, for instance, we have in one of our communities, there's a restaurant called Golden West, and they take B notes, but then they can exchange their B notes that they receive with Zeke's coffee, and they can buy their coffee from them. So when we strengthen local supply chains, this builds up slowly over time, but we can start to cut down on fossil fuel emissions from, bringing things in from further away. It tightens community connections, starts to rebuild us meeting each other, creates a dam so that we can begin to hold more money in our community instead of it bleeding out the corporations. That about the majority of money that we spend actually leaves our community. So this is a way of communities being able to consolidate their wealth again. And then also, I guess even beyond all that, which are longer term goals, though I guess the longest term goal would even to decouple it from the dollar, but to make people think about what currency actually is, which is one of the first things, because it's the world that we swim in, and so many people, we're not taught to think about what currency is. We're taught what it does, but not what it is. And when you hear about a local currency, your first question is why? Why do we need a local currency? Is this legal? And then just opening up conversations and making people kind of rethink what money is and where they're spending their money. And do they want to spend their money at Walmart? Or if they're able to, can they spend their money locally and support their neighbors?
That's a lot of benefits.
Yeah, definitely. And then, in the longer term, so it's coupled with the dollar right now. Eventually, and this is all still very much in planning stage, and this is just kind of like in the minds of the people like Julie Goldner and Jeff Dicken, and they have a whole team of people and volunteers that are really like, working to, making the B note a reality for everyone, is how to eventually separate it, because it can do that. It can be revolutionary to an extent, but it's still tied to debt bearing, the debt bearing dollar.
Yeah.
So and that is more, I guess, perhaps like a conversation for them of how they see that moving forward. And, they want, it eventually backed by the community, but then I guess that would be a piece that they would be able to flesh out.
Yeah, well, you have to build it a long time before you can get to that point.
That's true. And also that, I believe that it also had to start as this too, to get people to understand what it is. It's difficult to get merchants to sign on if they don't understand directly how it already correlates with the dollar, because then it becomes something that's maybe too radical of a concept. So if you can get people on board with, just that it's very straight, how the B note and the dollar pair together, but then that can slowly evolve over time.
Well, and when you talk about money as being an agreement, you need a lot of people to agree to do this, because you're talking about supply chains, and a lot of people are used to shipping in things from other places, and the supply chains are just essential. You have to have a number of people doing it, and you have a lot. I mean, 170 is a pretty respectable number. But, I mean, it's definitely, you need a lot of people participating and getting that agreement together. And then once they understand how it works and they start to realize that money is an agreement, then maybe at some point they'll be able to say, oh, well, why don't we just forget the other part of the agreement? Let's just make this our own thing and forget about the dollar.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that, I see that we're sowing the seeds right now for the new world that we want to come.
Yes.
And we can see what those possible long-term visions are, but even if it's changing people's conceptions and, making more connections than existed before, all of that counts. And that, right now we're really trying to sow the seeds of the newer world that we want to see.
Yeah. Well, that's a big thing. I mean, creating the new structures. A lot of people work on trying to amend the current structures, and I think that there's a place for that. But I don't think that that's where all the work should be. I think some of it is creating new structures, creating new communities, new structures, new agreements, new, like cooperative businesses, that sort of thing. It's about creating things the way that we want them. So as the old system doesn't work anymore, we have alternatives in place and ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Yeah. We have things in place that can grow up as old systems fail too. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you're doing, it
and
is
that's
seeds.
What's that?
Oh, I was just repeating what you said, which is that it is seeds.
Yeah. And it's again, it's connecting us together. That, I mean, when watching the news, it's hard not to be disheartened by how much is deeply wrong with the world. Seeing, I to be honest, I'm very scared about rising fascist movements around the world.
Yeah.
But then I also see there's a lot of light in our communities, and that's where we're immediately able to impact people and make change. And if we can all turn to our communities, then we're a step in the right direction.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Is there any way you want to let people know how to get a hold of you, like a website or anything like that, before we do your poem?
Oh, sure. I don't have like a centralized poetry website. Well, I guess I could give people my email if they wanted to connect with me about, sometimes I like make chapbooks and that kind of thing. It's easy to remember. It's poeting, POETING @gmail.com. And that's because, to be a poet is also a verb, or to be anything is also a verb. And that gets back to, like construction of our language again, subjects and verbs. But I think actually everything's just really verbs, and that some verbs that last longer we identify as subjects.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
If anybody wants to reach Robin, there's also links on my website, which is probably where most people are listening, which is connectingbetween.com. Also on the website, there is a form for signing up for the email list, where you'll get notifications of future guests. And there's Facebook and Twitter too. Yeah. So if you feel good about it, I'll have you read your poem, and then we'll say goodnight.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. Okay. This is called The Yin Frontier. The Yin Frontier is the interior, narrow road too. It's home before the conquering tribe rolls in, and then it's the union of flesh after the surge of yang, when the Celts ate the hearts of their admired enemies. It's tiny, 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 minuscule maps, nameless amoeba, lost points of origin, circling electrons in speed racer orbital exchange, weather systems and hot spots of language, pins and needles, blood flash leg, shock white static cling, pulling apart hot laundry. Whisker your cat's phosphorescent eyes, stroke of tail against laptop, the silence and space of new apartment, inner receptivity, hearing what is received, receiving what is given. It's heaven and earth embody, dancing on 200-year-old graves at St. Mark's, East Village, and beyond. It's Tiananmen before and after the tanks. It's the body before and after the rape. Before and after gentrification, it's the home where the pieces are picked up, the stomach waiting to be fed, the baby ant blown off the page. The suitcase flung open after sojourn, its mother's olive metallic round-barreled body Pontiac, a green arrow blinker ticking when turn signals still rhythmic tick. Hot, 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 summer leather seats and scorched metal mushroom locks, the dream of her abandoning me. It's deep underwater communication, resonance like wine glasses singing. It's the receiver, the radio, Jack Spicer's Martians, and letters to a dead Lorca. With the Dick Van Dyke Show roaring involuntary static assault, kinetic energy waiting to fall. The architect of the center of the World Trade Center, Minoru Yamasaki. In a world of perfect freedom, in a world of free expression of form, he'd create nothing but one-story buildings. A room with a view overlooking fields of flowers. Without his fear of heights, searching for a world of perfect freedom, freedom from fear of heights, freedom from fear of fear and the kinetic design embedded in the architecture of us, dreaming of a new architecture, a new architect of us. The space created is the space received.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, likewise. This was a really wonderful experience.
Yay.